The aircraft shuddered violently at 35,000 feet, its cabin consumed by chaos. The captain had collapsed, his lifeless form slumped over the controls, and the co-pilot's voice cracked with desperation over the intercom. "We've lost the pilot." Passengers screamed, clutching armrests as the plane lurched, tilting dangerously. Fear rippled through the cabin like wildfire, mothers shielding children, strangers exchanging panicked glances, prayers mingling with cries of despair. Amid the pandemonium, in seat winding C, a man sat motionless, his presence so unassuming it was almost invisible. Elias Moreau, 32, a French historian with wire-rimmed glasses and a worn tweed jacket, had been silent for the entire flight from London to Lisbon. His dark eyes, sharp and contemplative, betrayed no hint of alarm as he closed the leather-bound notebook on his lap. With deliberate calm, he rose, his steps steady despite the plane's convulsions, and moved toward the cockpit. His voice cut through the radio static with startling clarity. "Control, this is Spectre. I have control." Across military channels, radar screens flickered, and a stunned silence fell. "Spectre," a call sign buried in classified files, belonging to a pilot long presumed dead. Elias was an unremarkable figure to the untrained eye. His slight build, tousled brown hair, and quiet demeanor suggested a scholar lost in thought, perhaps a professor en route to a conference. No one would have guessed that this man, who carried a dog-eared copy of Thucydides and scribbled notes in meticulous script, had spent years embedded with NATO air forces, documenting covert operations in conflict zones. His work as a historian wasn't merely academic. It was an immersion in the lives of pilots, their machines, and the split-second decisions that defined survival in hostile skies. Elias had chosen silence as his armor, a way to observe without being observed, to absorb without drawing attention. On this flight, he sat alone, his notebook filled not with musings on ancient wars, but with detailed schematics of aircraft systems, emergency protocols, and the instincts of pilots he'd shadowed in Iraq and Syria. Passengers barely noticed him. A British executive in the adjacent seat had scoffed earlier, muttering, "What's with the bookworm? Doesn't even talk." Elias had offered only a faint smile, his pen moving steadily across the page, capturing thoughts no one else could decipher. When a young girl dropped her crayon, he retrieved it with a gentle nod, saying nothing. To the cabin, he was a ghost. Forgettable, unassuming, irrelevant. Yet, that unassuming exterior concealed a mind honed by years of relentless observation. Elias's silence wasn't weakness, it was discipline. His historian's craft demanded precision, an ability to reconstruct events from fragments, to understand systems through their smallest details. In cockpits across war zones, he'd sat behind pilots, not flying but watching, listening, memorizing. He'd learned the language of aviation, not through simulators but through the raw intensity of combat missions, where a single misstep meant catastrophe. His notebook, mistaken by passengers for a diary of idle thoughts, was a repository of technical expertise, thrust vectoring, stall recovery, emergency landing protocols. Each entry was a testament to his time with a pilot known as Spectre, a figure whose name was whispered in military circles before vanishing in a classified mission over the Persian Gulf. Spectre had trusted Elias with more than stories. He'd shared the mental framework of a pilot under fire, the logic of survival when chaos reigned. Elias had absorbed it all, his memory a steel trap for every procedure, every instinct, every decision. The flight had begun like any other. Passengers settled into their routines. Movies flickering on screens, flight attendants gliding down aisles with practiced smiles. Elias wrote quietly, his pen tracing lines that seemed trivial to anyone who glanced his way. A mother across the aisle assumed he was grading papers. A teenager thought he was sketching. His silence was so complete it felt intentional, as if he'd trained himself to blend into the background. But beneath that veneer of anonymity was a man whose mind held a living archive of aviation knowledge, built not through formal training, but through years of studying those who flew. A flight attendant later recalled, "He was so quiet, I barely noticed him. But his eyes, they saw everything, like he was cataloging the world." Then disaster struck. The captain's sudden collapse plunged the aircraft into crisis. The co-pilot, overwhelmed, fumbled at the controls, his voice trembling over the intercom. "We're losing altitude!" The cabin erupted in terror, the plane pitching as if caught in a storm. Passengers clung to one another, some sobbing, others frozen in shock. A flight attendant, her face pale, shouted above the din, "Does anyone know how to fly a plane?" The question hung in the air, absurd and desperate. No hands rose. The British executive sneered, "Sit down, mate. You're no pilot." His words dripped with contempt, aimed at Elias, who had already closed his notebook and stood. Ignoring the mockery, Elias moved with purpose, his stride unwavering despite the plane's violent tremors. A flight attendant blocked his path to the cockpit, her voice frantic. "Sir, you can't." Elias met her gaze, his tone calm but unyielding. "Open the door, or we all die." Something in his voice, its quiet authority, its absolute certainty, compelled her to step aside. Inside the cockpit, Elias slid into the captain's seat, his hands settling on the controls with a familiarity that defied his civilian status. The co-pilot stared, incredulous, as Elias's fingers moved with precision, adjusting the yoke, recalibrating instruments. Over the radio, his voice was steady. "Control, this is Spectre. I have control." Air traffic control froze. The call sign Spectre triggered alarms across military networks. F-35 fighters, patrolling nearby, received urgent orders to intercept. A pilot's voice crackled over a secure channel. "Spectre, that's impossible. He's been dead for years." The name belonged to a legend, a pilot whose missions had saved countless lives before his jet vanished in a fireball over the Gulf. Yet here, on a commercial flight, the call sign lived again, spoken by a man who shouldn't know it. Elias's hands danced across the controls, countering the plane's descent, stabilizing its erratic pitch. His movements were not those of a trained pilot, but of someone who had internalized every action through observation. The co-pilot, still reeling, stammered, "Who are you? How do you know what to do?" Elias's eyes remained fixed on the instruments. "Hi, I'm Elias Morrow, historian. Right now, I'm your captain. Explanations later." His words carried a quiet command, silencing doubt. His training as a historian had taught him to dissect complexity, to piece together truth from chaos. In war zones, he'd watched pilots navigate missile locks, engine failures, and impossible odds. He'd asked questions, not for articles, but for understanding, memorizing their every move. Spectre, the pilot who'd mentored him, had shared more than tactics. He'd revealed the mindset of a pilot facing death, the clarity needed to act, when panic threatened to consume. Elias had recorded it all, not in published works but in his notebook, a private chronicle of survival. In the cabin, the chaos began to subside. The plane's violent shaking eased, the nose leveling as Elias adjusted the controls. Passengers, still trembling, noticed the change. Whispers spread someone was flying the plane. Flight attendants, regaining composure, relayed Elias's voice over the intercom. "This is your acting captain. Remain seated, seatbelts fastened. We're preparing for an emergency landing. You're safe." The words, delivered with calm precision, sparked hope where despair had reigned. The British executive, who'd mocked Elias, sat silent, his face ashen. His earlier dismissal now felt like a grave misjudgment. The flight attendant who'd tried to stop Elias later said, when he spoke, it was like he'd done this 1,000 times. I didn't understand how, but I believed him. The call sign Spectre, however, had ignited a firestorm beyond the aircraft. Military networks buzzed with confusion. Command centers demanded verification. Was this a security breach, a hostile act? Intelligence analysts scoured classified files, confirming Spectre's death in a mission so secret its details were known to only a handful. The reappearance of his call sign on a civilian flight was unthinkable, prompting threat assessments and scrambled jets. Elias, unaware of the chaos he'd unleashed, focused on the task at hand. His hands moved with the precision of memory, executing maneuvers he'd seen Spectre perform in combat. He adjusted thrust, recalibrated navigation, and communicated with ground control in flawless aviation terminology. The co-pilot, now following his lead, marveled at his competence. "You've never flown?" he asked, voice tinged with awe. Elias's response was curt, "Never. But I've seen it done." "That's enough?" The truth was extraordinary. Elias's expertise wasn't born in a cockpit, but in the shadows of war. As a historian, he'd embedded with air forces, documenting missions with a rigor that rivaled military training. He'd sat in cockpits during live operations, not touching controls, but absorbing every detail: the hum of engines, the flicker of warning lights, the calm cadence of pilots under pressure. Spectre, a pilot of unparalleled skill, had taken Elias under his wing, sharing not just procedures but philosophy: how to think when the world was falling apart. Elias had recorded every lesson, not for publication but for understanding, his notebook a testament to a bond forged in trust. Spectre's final gift, shared in a quiet moment before his last mission, was a set of authentication codes, a safeguard known only to him. "If you ever need to prove you're one of us," Spectre had said, "use these." Elias had never expected to need them. As the plane stabilized, military channels grew tense. F-35s flanked the aircraft, their pilots awaiting orders to engage or escort. The call sign Spectre had triggered protocols reserved for high-level threats. Then, Elias transmitted the code Spectre had given him, a sequence so specific it silenced the chatter. A fighter pilot's voice broke through. "Those codes, only Spectre knew them. Who is this guy?" The authentication shifted the narrative. This wasn't a hijacking, it was something unprecedented, a civilian wielding knowledge that shouldn't exist. Elias's voice remained steady over the radio, coordinating with ground control as he prepared for an emergency landing in Lisbon. His historian's mind, trained to synthesize chaos into clarity, served him now. Every adjustment, every decision echoed Spectre's teachings, refined by Elias's own relentless observation. In the cabin, passengers began to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. The man they'd overlooked, the quiet scholar in 19C, was saving their lives. The mother, who'd thought he was grading papers, now watched in awe. The teenager who'd assumed he was sketching whispered, "He's flying the plane." The British executive, his earlier arrogance shattered, stared at his hands, grappling with his error. Elias's notebook, once dismissed as trivial, now symbolized something profound: knowledge earned through attention, not credentials. Flight attendants shared hushed stories of his transformation from silent passenger to commanding presence. One said, "His calmness. It was like he knew the plane better than the pilots." As the aircraft descended toward Lisbon, Elias's communication with ground control was seamless, his terminology precise, his decisions unerring. The co-pilot, now a willing assistant, followed his instructions, marveling at his composure. Military escorts shifted from threat to protection, their pilots recognizing a truth: whoever this man was, he was no imposter. The authentication codes had proven his connection to Spectre, but his actions proved something more: a mind capable of turning observation into expertise. The plane touched down in Lisbon, the landing smooth, almost routine. No cheers erupted. Instead of a heavy silence fell, filled with gratitude too deep for words. Passengers parted as Elias exited the cockpit, their eyes following him with reverence. He offered no explanation, only a quiet nod before stepping away. News of the event spread like lightning. Historian saves flight using dead pilots calls sane. Dominated headlines. The British executive, shaken, posted a viral apology online. I called him a bookworm. He saved us all. Social media erupted with face specterizes, transforming a name once tied to loss into a symbol of legacy. Elias's notebook, photographed by a passenger, became an icon. A scholar's tool turned life-saving manual. Military analysts dissected the incident, recognizing a new paradigm. Expertise born not of training, but of relentless observation. Spector's family, long in mourning, issued a statement. He trusted Elias with his knowledge, and Elias honored that trust. We're forever grateful. Elias vanished from the spotlight, slipping through a service exit as reporters swarmed the airport. He had no interest in fame, only in the work that had always driven him: understanding, documenting, preserving. His notebook, later donated to a Lisbon aviation museum, was displayed beside Spector's flight log, a testament to the power of observation. Aviation schools began studying the case, integrating lessons about the value of embedded observers. Military programs invited historians to share insights, recognizing that expertise could emerge from unexpected sources. Children across Europe learned of the quiet man who saved a plane, a lesson in the strength of those who watch, listen, and remember. The legacy of Spector lived on, not just in a call sign, but in the idea that knowledge could transcend formal boundaries. Elias's actions proved that true power lay not in titles, but in the discipline to observe, the courage to act, and the humility to step away when the job was done. His story reshaped perceptions, teaching the world to look beyond appearances, to value the silent minds that carry extraordinary capabilities. Years later, the incident remained a touchstone, a reminder that the person you dismiss as unremarkable might hold the key to survival. Elias returned to his work, his pen still moving across pages, capturing truths that others might never see. But that could, one day, change everything.